talk a little bit about implementation considerations. Okay, so that's what it looks like from a technical perspective. Let's talk about what does an actual implementation of this look like. The whole prototyping process can be done on a simple star in roughly 2 weeks. And this is something I've done quite a bit. We pick a star, and I'll have at it for a couple of weeks, and I'll work with somebody to go ahead and do some of the basic mapping into the repository so we can test it out. Now, allow for more time, obviously. If you have your data volumes are very large, right? You may need more than 1 or 2 tables here. You may need 5 or 6 aggregate tables or mini tables or whatever the case may be. If you have very hard to reach performance targets, it's going to be obviously more difficult to reach. Again, you may need more tables, more work. If you have a lot of complexity in your models and your RPD mappings and things like that, that's going to take a little bit more time to make sure that not only you understand it, that you build it, and that you regression test it. If you have kind of a scattering of reports, or you only have a few reports, right, it's going to be more difficult to discern any patterns in how those reports and what those reports are doing. Therefore, it'll be more difficult to come up with an actual solution that works for them. Right? And finally, if you have more than 1 star is needed, for example, actuals and budgets are commonly used together, well, maybe you actually have to do both of those at the same time to show any real value. So that may add a little bit more. But once you've done all that, the implementation is really only a couple of weeks on the ETL and RPD side, the OBI side. You know, it's a lot more than a design that's handed over to the development team. It's an actual accurate SQL statement that, in many cases, the development team just has to clean up and kind of productionalize and then throw into the scheduling system, whether it's the DAC or your own, and just kind of run through the QA process on it. And then finally, you would want to make sure that you do a proper regression test, and then eventually your deployment. Okay. This is something that's actually surprisingly has been a little bit difficult. Customers have a little bit of trouble getting a good tuning environment. Right? First of all, we have to tune on production data volumes or as near as possible. Okay, tuning on a data model with a different data shape will not work. It simply will not work. We must make sure we have accurate code and DDL and all that across the board. We need a quiet, unused machine for accurate benchmarking. It's going to be very difficult if there's other load on the database or the storage device while you're testing. You can't tell before and after. You just can't do it. We want to make sure our hardware is as similar as possible to prod. This is probably the hardest one. A lot of customers don't have identical hardware across their environments, which is fine. KPI does have a benchmarking tool that actually benchmarks your database to see, hey, you know what, production is 50% faster than your test environment. So we can kind of use that as a guide to some degree. So considerations. All right, this is more for the PMs in the group. Yes, there is additional ETL and RPD development. I recommend using the SQL scripts that come out of the prototyping effort instead of building Informatica mapping. It's just less effort and it runs a lot faster. Very, very simple to do this. Informatica can just simply call a script and build it. In many cases, it may be a materialized view where you just tell the materialized view just to refresh itself. You're going to need, obviously, some additional testing, but regression test is actually pretty easy. As long as you have 2 static snapshots before and after, it's pretty easy to figure out that your results are the same. Additional ETL runtime has actually been more of a common critical problem. Obviously, we're building new tables and indexes and gathering stats and all that kind of stuff on these new objects. That takes additional ETL time. Don't undertake this effort until you have enough batch window to do so. In many cases, I've seen, we've done some analysis and prototyping. The customer says, you know what, I have an 8-hour batch window, but my loads are taking 11 hours. Well, the camel's back is already broken. You can't add any more to it. So we got to focus. We had to shift gears and focus on getting that ETL time down to a more manageable level, so we can add more of this performance layer execution on it. Database size, that's trivial. That's very minor. The most interesting one here is customization, propagation, or impact analysis, right? So, well, now I've mapped my table, my fields over into this table. Now I have to also bring it over to yet another table or even 2 tables. Well, yeah, but that's true of any aggregate, though. There's really no difference there, right? And you have to ask yourself, well, what are your alternatives, right? These are the kinds of things that you're pretty much going to have to do to make this perform well. And be aware of complex logic. It's going to be more difficult. I mentioned that a little while ago. Financial analytics is a more difficult one because there's a very large snowflake in there with multiple segment hierarchies. And so that requires some work to get around that to make it perform well. And I also mentioned the HR workforce event and snapshot logic, right? So there's some trickiness with effective dates and backdating and future dating and snapshots and things like that. Okay. So overall, the impact of actually building these tables for a particular start is not that huge. The only real hard part is skill part is figuring out what the SQL skills to do the analysis. Actually implementing it is relatively straightforward. And you can get, as you've seen with some of the examples I've sprinkled throughout, the performance benefits are very, very nice. And it does not take a tremendous amount of effort, does not take hundreds of thousands of dollars of hardware to achieve these benefits. And with that, Jeremiah, that's what I've got. I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. At this point in our session, we will open up the forum for questions from the attendees.